Hello and welcome to the Reviews Brothers, where we are looking at the A to Z of hidden gems for the PlayStation 2 letter by letter. And I've also got myself a cold, but that's okay, because it's only made me sound sexier. Okay, maybe not. I still have a long way to go in this A to Z, and it's already getting tough whittling down each letter to just 10 games, but I do think that we've got some good ones in here in the letter E, which is why they're here. Anyway, you know the drill, so how about I shut up, you press that subscribe button, and we take a look at some games. First up is Zeus, or is it Zeus? I don't know. This is a mecha-inspired shoot-'em-up where you are a mecha pilot who has the exhilarating task of navigating a heavily armed and agile mech through waves of enemies. Alien robot things have come from space and forced humans to live underground, but after years building themselves these massive mechs, we are ready to head back to the surface and see if we can reclaim what's ours. And to be fair, the aliens didn't do all that much damage in the first place. The game plays a lot like your classic Star Fox style games, where you're just flying forwards, aiming a crosshair at just about everything, and hammering on the attack button. The levels themselves only last about 5 minutes each before you get to a boss, and they have a decent enough variety of various places around the world that have been smashed up a bit by the aliens. There are 3 mechs, and they all have the usual stats of fast but weak, slow but strong, and then the all-round one. I found them all fine to play as. Sadly, though, that's the only difference, and the weapons and abilities are all the same no matter which one you choose. As you get further into the game, the levels have more hazards, as well as enemies that you have to watch out for, like poles or rocks or toppled over buildings. The enemies themselves come in a few varieties, all of them fly and often shoot projectiles at you, though some just try to kamikaze at you. Killing them is easy for the most part, and it is a little clunky. You've got a regular blaster, and this is decent enough. It'll kill most things quite easily, but can feel a little slow. This can be powered up by collecting items that enemies drop, cunningly named Power Up. This adds more shots to your attack, so you basically end up with a spread gun, which is nice as you can take out multiple enemies at once. You also have a charge attack. Your meter is constantly building, and to use it you just hold down the fire button for a second or so. When you do this, you will stop moving and you fire a massive energy beam that does massive damage, though do be careful as you can still be hurt while doing this. Thankfully, you can still dodge. You also have a lock-on attack done by pressing the square button. You can target multiple enemies with this, but it does have limited uses, so don't go too mental with it. You'll be firing out a load of rockets and it does look pretty cool. And finally there's a bomb attack, which is your standard screen clearing one. These are pretty hard to come by, so make sure you use it wisely. What's interesting here, and sometimes quite annoying, is that you don't actually get more ammo, health or shields between levels. Instead, you earn money as you play and have to use this between levels in a shop to upgrade your health as well as replenish your ammo, buy shields and smart bombs. Everything is pretty expensive as well, which is a pain in the ass, and you really do have to decide what you want to get. Having said that though, it did seem that you get unlimited continues here, and if you die, you come right back to where you left off with full health, so I just focused on weapons. The biggest issue with the game though is probably the collision detection, which is a bit wonky. There were loads of times where I'd take damage from enemies, but really have no idea why. It's hard to see projectiles, and enemies can seem to hit you wherever, even if their shots are miles away. Even with that though, I was able to get through the game with very little trouble, and it'll only take an hour or so to do that, which is just as well as there's no save or password here. The bosses here can be some of the standout fights, but they are kind of similar in playstyle. They just seem to stay in one place, and you just have to keep blasting at their weak spot while it's visible and their blue shields are down. They do look cool though, and it's fun blowing their limbs off and seeing how their attacks change throughout the fight. Graphically the game is fine. It was a very early one for the system, and it looks like a budget game. It's not offensive, just a bit basic. The controls are pretty decent though, and I did actually find this to be one of those games that I had to do just one more level. My main control issue was the dodge though. You can do a barrel roll using the shoulder buttons to dodge attacks, but you can also do this by double tapping left or right, and you'll accidentally do this all the time as you're trying to just dodge regular attacks, and they'll mostly end up with you flying straight into them, which is kind of annoying. But these are only real minor complaints, and if you like scrolling shooters, then this one is fun and chaotic while it lasts. More budget goodness now with Earache Extreme Metal Racing, a crazy kart racer with a metal theme. Being a kart racer, you kind of already know what to expect here. You've got a surprisingly decent roster of racers, 10 in total, some of which need to be unlocked, and yes, they have the usual stats available for each racer of speed, weight, handling, etc. And I actually really like the character designs here. Each one has their own car, and it's kind of like Wacky Races if it was made by an edgy 14-year-old, but I kind of mean that in a nice way. You have various demons, undead people and bondage women all taking part. What's cool is that each character has their own weapon as well. These range from axes, clubs, spikes and buzzsaws. The variety is cool, and you can use the weapons to attack both left and right, kind of like in Road Rash or Street Racer. You also have a nice amount of game modes to choose from. There's single races, where you just choose from any of the tracks you've unlocked. There's a challenge mode, which is actually the cup mode, and this is what you'll want to play through to unlock everything else in the game. Each challenge has 4 races, and you'll get points depending on your finishing position for each one. Have the most points at the end, and you'll unlock the rest of the tracks. These can be used in every other mode once you're completed. Races only have 4 racers taking part in them, which doesn't seem like many, but they're so fast paced and frantic that actually it is quite a blessing. You'll be racing through graveyards, hell, barren wastelands and other such things that metal lovers are into. You know, all things death and destruction. The game is so edgy. The courses themselves are always quite convoluted, but never too confusing, and you do get a mini-map in the corner that helps you see where you are. You'll need to use your car's weapon to destroy the other racers or knock them out of your way, but destroying them doesn't take them out of the race, it just sets them back a bit. There's also zombies on the tracks. Killing these gives you points, and once you've amassed a certain number of points, new characters will be unlocked. It doesn't take long to unlock them all though. Also, some of the zombies have icons above their heads. One is a skull with horns, and I'll be honest, I never really figured out what this did. I kind of have a feeling that it gives you some health back or even more points, but it was hard to tell. The other one is a lightning bolt. This blasts whoever is in first position with lightning, making them go flying into the air and really making their life miserable. You do have to be careful though, as if you're the person in first place and collect it, you will still zap yourself. There's also a zombie massacre mode where you and 3 other racers have to kill all the zombies on a given stage, and then whoever has the most kills at the end of the day wins. This is fun and would be good with a friend or two. As it's a budget game, it does have its flaws. For the most part, the racing isn't too bad, and the controls are actually quite responsive, but there's not much finesse to them. Also, when you get attacked, you just randomly go flying around the area, you never really know where you're going to end up. Also, the computer AI is crazy good, and the game is pretty hard even on the easiest difficulty setting. In fact, when I first started playing, I didn't really enjoy the game, but after 2 or 3 races, I actually started getting really into it. The graphics are decent enough, the tracks do look a bit samey, which is a shame. There's only a few landscapes, but the tracks themselves are slightly mixed up. This is still a surprisingly fun game though, and it's definitely a game that I would play with a few friends. It's fast and smooth, which I also didn't expect. Oh, and I should mention the soundtrack. It's all licensed metal music, and even though I do like metal music, believe it or not, I didn't really like many of the tracks, if any of them, that were here. It's just full of those bands that sound like the singer is vomiting into a bucket. I actually had to turn it off after a while and put some Enya on instead. But even so, this is a funky racing game that technically is a load of crap, but actually it's somewhat amusing to play. Fighting game time now with Elemental Gerad, whatever the hell that means, and I've probably said that wrong. This is a 3D fighting game based on an anime, which you can really tell right from the get-go. It might shock you to know that I have no idea about the anime or its story, but from what I can see, there's a bunch of sky pirates, some of them like each other, some don't, so they have a fight. The thing is that some of the sky pirate people, mainly the sexy women, can turn themselves into some elemental weapons, like swords or boots, and then attach themselves to another character to use in battle. So basically, each character is actually a pair of characters, well, most of them anyway. One being the one you control, and the other being the spirit weapon, though none of this makes any difference while you're playing. So you choose your character, and then you play through the story mode, which is full of Japanese text and cutscenes, and I'm assuming follows some kind of story quite closely, as it possibly can in a video game format, or at least a version of the story that requires everyone to have a one-on-one fight. In the story mode, you don't get to choose who you play as, and switch depending on what's going on, but you seem to mostly be Ku and Ren, who are the main characters, as you can tell from their generic anime hero design. You also have an arcade mode where you can choose from any of the fighters that you've unlocked, and there's a nice fair few to unlock, and you fight everyone else in a best of 3 rounds. The fighting here is simple, but there are a good amount of combos, specials and super specials that you can do, mostly with Street Fighter style inputs, and they're also quite easy to do. The super specials can be confusing though. The ones I got to work would activate what I assume were quick time events, but even though I would press the buttons in the correct time, they never seemed to work and I have no idea what I was doing wrong. This is a 3D fighter, and there is a decent emphasis on dodging around your opponent as well as blocking, which is done with the R1 button. Sadly, I prefer holding back to block. But dodging is fast and easy, just like Beltbuckle Bill. But while the fighting is solid enough, there isn't a whole lot of depth to it, so this isn't going to be a game that's made for the hardcore fight fans. More for people who like a scrap, but prefer the button mashing method. Though, as always, playing with someone who knows what they're doing will always be harder than just button bashing. The characters themselves are actually all quite fun to play as, well, the 6 or so that I tried were at least. They feel different enough, but have similar button commands that you aren't spending ages trying to figure out new moves. Graphically, the game is actually brilliant, with some incredible high-res cel-shaded graphics. The characters all animate really well, and there's a ton of backgrounds with loads going on. In fact, this game gave my totally legit PS2 and not PCSX2 emulator a bit of a hard time with a few frame rate drops. But yes, my totally legit PS2 doesn't have the best specs out there, so it's likely that your totally legit PS2, which has higher specs than mine, probably won't have this issue. Overall, this is a fun fighting game though, and it's worth checking out if you need some spiky haired people to punch each other that aren't Saiyans. Now for a game in one of my favourite gaming franchises. It's Escape from Monkey Island. Escape from Monkey Island takes the classic point-and-click formula from the awesome DOS games and transforms them into a 3D for the first time, with surprisingly good results. The Monkey Island games are probably my favourite point-and-click ones out there, and this is actually my first time playing this one, as I really wasn't sure I'd enjoy the transition to 3D. Basically, the game is a puzzle adventure, filled with obscure, nonsensical puzzles, dozens of characters to talk to, and some mini-games to play. The story goes that the mighty pirate Guybrush Threepwood and his wife, Governor Elaine, are returning to their home on Melee Island after being married in a previous game. Sorry, spoilers. But because their honeymoon was 3 months long, everyone assumed that they died at sea, and a new election is taking place with some suspicious-looking candidates. So you have to do a bunch of crazy shit to get a bunch of new pirates in your crew, find some lawyers and fix the whole mess. And you never know, the evil zombie pirate LeChuck may or may not rear his ugly head again. You control Guybrush with the analog stick, where you explore a load of environments, downs, islands, etc. that are all filled with crazy characters and items to interact with and collect. You've got to speak to everyone and get as many items as you can to use in the puzzles throughout the game. But as I mentioned, the puzzles rarely make any sense, but deliberately so, and things are very tenuous and almost always played for laughs. For example, the first puzzle sees you needing to stop a man from destroying your house with a catapult. While wandering around, you find a deflated rubber tube which you have to then tie around a cactus to use as your own catapult. But to do this, you also need to distract the man with some pretzels, but you can only get the pretzels by conning a darts player into bursting a drunk man's birthday balloon. Yeah, like I said, it doesn't make much sense, and that's why I love it. It's good if you can handle the off-the-wall comedy. If you've watched the other videos in this series, you probably would have heard me mention that often games like this can be easy to get stuck in, and you end up having to resort to using every item with everything else to see what works. And to be fair, that is still the case with this game. They are not the sort that you can breeze through, and progress is often very slow, but that is sort of the point. Technically, you could beat this game in just a couple of hours, but on your first playthrough without a guide, it really could take weeks to explore everywhere, find everything, and figure out what you need to do. But for me, that's half the fun. It might be because I grew up with games like this, but I really do enjoy this sort of gameplay, and I'm particularly impatient, so that's kind of surprising. As mentioned, the game is basically a comedy, and the writing here is excellent. All the characters have loads to say, and you'll probably want to listen to everything that they do say, as this is where you get all your clues from for how to solve puzzles and where to go and what to do next. The game looks decent, even though it has lost some of its charm by going from 2D to 3D, but they have done a great job of keeping the style and plenty of comedy in the cutscenes. And when talking to people, it makes you want to keep talking and playing, and this is a game I could easily lose hours to. The controls are a little bit iffy here on the PlayStation, being primarily a PC game where you'd have access to a mouse, but here you do have the shoulder buttons to highlight items that are on the screen, and each of the face buttons does a different action, like look, pick up, use, etc. There's no on-screen indicators though, and I would always forget which button was which, though this doesn't really have an impact on the gameplay, as it's not a game where you can die. It just more means that it took me 3 button presses to pick something up rather than just 1. Still, if you have a PS2, this is a really cool game that I would definitely recommend adding to the collection and playing through. It is very self-aware and just a good time.
Hit and run dinghy accident?
Hurt your back while pillaging another ship?
No.
Play Eternal Quest now. Do-do-do-do. Do-do-do-do-do. Do-do-do-do-do. Play Eternal Quest now. Hello, I'm Beltbuckle Bill, and here are my thoughts on a video game. Eternal Quest is a top-down, turn-based RPG dungeon explorer released on the PlayStation 2 in 2004. Brought to you by Tamsoft and Midas Interactive Entertainment. The plot. There were two raging armies, one led by a shogun, the other a realm king, and a war led to plague and starvation. The dogs, greed and ambition, spread wild across the lands. Evil and malice, I'm assuming two other dogs, found their way to Jinuma. Luckily, the shogun ordered Gyukuru to wipe out the demons. That, I guess, hid in an ever-changing dungeon in Jinuma. Let's be real. Whilst there is a plot, it doesn't overly matter. It doesn't develop further until level 50, which ends in a boss fight, but I won't spoil it in case any of you are brave enough to roll up your sleeves and delve deep into this, as it isn't a quick playthrough. So, you are Gyukuru. You can move in any direction, if the dungeon will let you. You can move, block, melee attack and throw throwing weapons, if you have them. Each time you carry out an action, the enemies carry out an action, even if you can't see them. This will make sense later. As you take turns trying to descend the dungeon and destroy the evil on level 50. I seldom used block, it didn't seem to do too much, and sometimes you naturally block anyway. If you have a melee weapon equipped, you'll use that for your melee attack. The weapons have a durability, so once you've used it X amount of times, it'll break, and you'll have fisticuffs only, which are significantly weaker. You start with a sword, and pick up other weapons as you explore each level. And explore each level you should, as the enemies get significantly harder the deeper you go, which shouldn't really be a surprise to anyone. The game was super hard initially. The first handful of times I played it, I died pretty darn quickly. You start at level 1, which tracks, then walk to the exit to level 2. Think gauntlet, and so forth. If enemies see you, they will typically move towards you and bash the heckins out of you. Bugs take at least 4 hits, but they can kill you in 4 hits too, so don't try to take on more than one. Luckily, you self-heal over time, unless you're affected by a status. So early on you really have to avoid fights unless you're at full health, or you picked up a super weapon. All weapons encountered so far are types of swords or daggers with swordy names. When you go to equip them, you can see what it will do to your base attack stat. Daggers are for throwing. Other items you pick up include armour, which improve your defence, herbs and pills, which have varying attributes such as restoring health or recovering from a status effect, like poison. Statuses are received from enemies during battles and include burn, manic and paralysed. They last for a while or until cured and can lower your attack, your chance to block, stop you from healing and probably other things as well. I didn't really work them out. I've only met a bunch of enemies, but from catching footage of someone completing the game, I could tell I've seen most of them. They just change colour and design slightly, and they become slightly more powerful and have different names. There are flying creatures, bugs and birds, floating monks that summon bugs and birds, giant ox-like creatures that have great strength and health, rocks that you hit and they turn into gargantuan beasts that hand your ass to you, and floating skulls. And if you don't kill them quick enough, they possess you and stop you from healing, which is a pretty cool mechanic. To clarify, that's just the skulls. Like every RPG ever, you gain EXP when you kill things, and level up, which improves your base stats including health, so it does bode well to fully explore the dungeons, collect the items and kill evil things. Weirdly, you have an item which is a bell, which when you ring it, it takes you back to level 1 and experience 1, but you have all of your items. Very weird. There is a hack, which I didn't know until I'd watched a playthrough, where if you get into a fight that is a little hairy, save and exit, then reload and you'll be back in the same level but a different layout. And that's something I haven't mentioned yet. The levels are randomly generated, so there is no point in remembering anything, just explore each time. That's probably the biggest negative for me. It's a lot about luck early on. If you get good weapons or armour early on, you'll live longer. If you don't, you will die lots. The graphics are pretty shite, but I don't mind that. The level designs are uninspiring, grass, caves, water, etc., but they're fine. The sound effects are acceptable, with slashing noises and explosions aplenty, but the music is a very annoying loop of eerie nonsense. The controls are okay, especially when I learnt to use the right thumbstick to change the direction in which I was looking, and then you can move diagonally. Would I play it again? Definitely, and if I'm honest, I'm still playing it. I want to get to level 50 and kill the boss. Spoiler alert, it doesn't end the game though. So I did give up watching someone on level 101 and nothing happened on level 100. So I'm not sure how much replayability it will have once I complete it. Would I tell my younger self to play it? Yeah, absolutely. I've sunk a couple of hours into it already, but because you can save progress, you don't have to sit there for hours, but I totally would have done that as a teenager or young adult. Would I recommend it to a friend? Yes. I think you have to be a grinder to truly appreciate this title, but it is very easy to pick up and play and improve very quickly. Overall, I really enjoyed this game. Whilst visually weak and audibly dull, it's challenging with a great variety of items to collect and experiment with, including a map which reveals the entire dungeon level you are on, showing you where enemies are, and tactics to employ to take on the hordes. I didn't even mention Duel, which gets more powerful each time you kill an enemy, and once unleashed it explodes, causing turn-based damage to enemies that stand on it. It's pretty cool. Beltbuckle Bill says, give it a go. Thank you for watching and or listening. If you like this content, then like. If you want some more, then subscribe. Game over, man! Game over!
Here is a shooter with a stupid name. It's Espgaluda. Why do so many shooters have stupid names? This is a vertical scrolling shooter from bullet hell shooter Crazy Bastards Cave, which I believe only got a Japanese release here on the PS2. I'll be honest, I have no idea what the story is here, but really that's not that important. It seems like your king has been killed, so you set off to avenge his death and kill anything that gets in your way. At the start of the game you get to choose between two characters, a guy and a girl, both of which play very similarly. Then you're thrown into your usual cave shooter levels of towns, forests, caves, and you'll be taking down waves of enemies that fire crazy amounts of bullets at you. You know, it's a bullet hell. As with most games like this, you can hold down the attack button to do a constant stream of attacks. These are pretty decent right from the get-go, but pressing X or square do different attacks, one of which is straight ahead and the other one that moves around a bit more, depending on your character. You can collect P icons which power up your weapons, and it doesn't take long before the screen is just filled with bullets all over the place. Most of them are from enemies though, and this is where the crazy mechanics come in. Well, it's not that crazy. When you kill enemies, they drop crystals. Collect as many of these as you can. Then you can press square to change to a different form. When you're in this form, the enemy shots turn pink and move much slower, making them easier to avoid. But when you're in this mode, your crystals will deplete, so that's basically how long you have to use this mode for. You can stay in the other form once they've run out, but the bullets go back to regular speed. You get the normal variety of flying enemies here with various ships, ground units to blow to bits, but as always you never really have much time to see what they are, as they're usually hidden by copious amounts of bullets on the screen anyway. Thankfully, like most of their games, this one is pretty fair, and your hitbox is tiny, meaning that you'll be able to stay alive for much longer than you'd expect, considering how much crap is on the screen basically all the time. As with all cave games, the graphics are fantastic 2D sprites with some pre-rendered enemies in there, and it all runs very smoothly. The bosses are massive, multi-phase battles, and these are fun to fight. As you can tell, my totally legit PS2 has some issues with the bullets, giving them a strange box around them. If anyone knows what settings can be adjusted to fix this, please do let me know. But yeah, if you're into your shooters, then this is definitely one I would recommend playing. Loads of fun. I have not actually managed to beat this one, though I reckon it's one that I will go back to keep trying. If you prefer your adventures to be underwater, then Everblue 2 might be what you're after. There is an Everblue 1, but I didn't try that one. Everblue 2 is a scuba diving adventure game, a genre that I actually really like, and there's quite a few games knocking around like this that I'm a big fan of. You play as Leo, a diver whose ship sinks, forcing you to swim to a nearby island. Thankfully, it's basically a friendly tropical paradise. The actual sinking of your ship doesn't really seem to bother you though. On the island you meet another group of divers and scavengers called the Amigos, so you join their group and start going out to sea looking for trinkets and treasure that you can sell to buy better equipment that lets you visit places in the ocean that are further away and are deeper and have better treasure. Also, it turns out that there's an evil corporate salvage company doing the same thing, and they're looking for a massive haul of legendary pirate treasure, so you've got to try and track it down before they do. The gameplay is basically made up of two different types. You spend some of the game on an island where you can go around and talk to the various people. The people will then give you sob stories of things they've lost at sea or tell you about their favourite fish and basically give you missions to go out and look for things while you're diving. As well as this, you've got shops you can visit to buy new equipment as well as items to help you while you're on your dive. It's also here where the story progresses. The main bulk of the game though is taking a boat out to sea and diving. Early on you get access to the boat and can choose from basically anywhere on the map where you want to start your dive. Then you're in a first person mode where you can start swimming around hunting for treasure, looking for creatures to take photos of, and of course try not to drown or get eaten. Pressing the L1 button lets out a ping, and if you're near some treasure you'll get a ping back. Then you've got to swim around pressing L1 until the pings get faster and faster and eventually you find the treasure. You start off only being able to find metal objects, but as you get further into the game you get new radar that can detect things like glass, etc, so you can find many more objects. Everything has a weight to it though, and you'll need to buy bigger bags to let you carry more heavier things. To start with you can only carry 2 or 3 items, so make sure you do upgrade your bag as soon as you can. You also have to keep upgrading your wetsuit and air canisters. Doing this lets you visit deeper areas that hold the better stuff and obviously let you dive for longer. You'll find sunken boats and planes and wrecks that you can explore to find even more cooler stuff, and later on you'll have to watch out for deadly sea creatures that want to eat your face. The gameplay loop here is surprisingly addictive, and I really found that I had to just have one more try every time. Collecting items, getting them valued and then selling them is really good fun, and the story, although pretty cheesy, is engaging enough. The graphics are a bit of a mixed bag. The island sections look incredibly cheap and very PS1, with pre-rendered scenes and very little animation. But I do quite like the underwater bits. These are cool and the variety in wildlife and coral is pretty good. You even get a camera so you can take photos of everything you see, which are added to an album. So of course you'll want to fill that album and hunt down every creature you can find. Games like this, Endless Ocean on the Wii and Diver's Dream on the PS1 really appeal to me for some reason. I think it's because they're just relaxing to play, and I really would recommend giving this one a go. Let's have a platform game now with evil twin Cyprien's Chronicles from Ubisoft. Here you play as an orphan called Cyprien, and wouldn't you know it, your favourite teddy bear has been captured by some dark magical tentacles from another world, so you have to go get it back. Now actually the story is quite a lot darker than that, dealing with the death of Cyprien's parents and the stories of other kids in the orphanage being taken by tentacles, but you are best off seeing it played out in the game rather than me badly relaying it to you. So you end up in a crazy world that's filled with all sorts of strange locations and inhabitants that you'll need to explore and fight in order to save your teddy, as well as some other kids from the orphanage. This is all done in classic 3D platform style and is a relatively early game for the PS2, which does show, but it's still a good time. After battling through a quite lengthy tutorial section, where you're taught how to run, jump, etc., you are plonked into a hub world where you discover that a great zippet, which is needed to rescue people and save the land, has been separated into 4 pieces, and each one sent to a different part of the world. So you have to navigate a number of tricky platforming sections, battle enemies, and solve puzzles in order to get them all back. The game is actually quite linear despite its hub world and look. You have to visit each area in turn, where you'll meet a ton of strange characters who will ask you to do things for them like kill enemies, collect items, etc, and doing this will usually reward you with a new item for yourself that you can use elsewhere in the world to open up a new area. I wouldn't really say this is a Metroidvania style game, as you don't really need to backtrack all that often other than to return to the characters that gave you the missions. There are a good number of enemies here, but the game never overwhelms you with them. You can fight them in a few ways. You've got a slingshot, like any good orphan does. This has unlimited ammo and is actually pretty handy against most enemies. It's slow to fire but has an auto aim, or you can go into first person mode to manually aim. You'll also need to use this to hit certain switches and things like that. You do get different ammo types and other uses out of it as well, like needing to fire paper airplanes, which you can then guide. You also have a jump attack, which, to be honest, I hate using. You jump in the air and press square to do a dive bomb thing, but it attacks at an angle and is really slippery. It's hard to hit enemies with it, and if you're anywhere near an edge, you will almost always slide off. I rarely bothered using this after a while. On top of this though, you can also collect items that build a power meter. This lets you transform into a super version of yourself, and what's cool is you can do it no matter how much power is in the meter. But as long as there is power in there, you have access to some more abilities. Firstly, you move faster and jump higher, but there's also a lightning attack which you have, which is really powerful, as well as a fireball attack. But using these drains your power bar quicker, so you need to be careful where and when you use them all. Thankfully, these icons that increase your power bar do reappear fairly often, so it's easy enough to come back to them. As mentioned, there's a few platforming sections, and I do have to say that these can be a pain in the ass, mainly thanks to the controls, which are quite sloppy and unresponsive. And they do make some of the sections a pain to play through, and there's quite a few times where I died where I really don't think I should have done. There's a delay in pressing the button and actually doing something, which is never good in a game. Though I did find I had to try again and again. I think that's down to the overall tone of the game, which is exactly my style. The characters, the world and everything just look great, and it's got a real Tim Burton or American McGee feel to it. The world is surreal and sinister, and you never know really which characters you should be trusting and which ones are going to stab you in the back. The amount of subtle imagery here is great as well. It's kind of like Silent Hill vibes meets Coraline, in the way that everything is a blend of subconscious thoughts and problems but brought to life. This is what really made me keep playing the game, and rescuing all the kids and saving the imaginary land was always intriguing. This is the sort of game that really should get a remaster. The visual style really is incredible, and with some polish to the controls, this could be a fantastic game. As it is though, it is still a good game, and you should check it out. Extermination is a game that was recommended to me along with a bunch of other ones I need to check out from Trevor Dowell, so thank you for the recommendation. Extermination is a cool survival horror game that was clearly inspired by The Thing, seeing you take control of Dennis Riley, a US Marine who is sent with his squad to an Arctic base. There's been a distress call, so you need to go find out what the hell is going on and rescue as many people as you can. Turns out there's a bunch of strange slug-like creatures that are infecting the people on the base and turning them into horrific bloodthirsty monsters that need shooting in the face. Unlike a lot of survival horror games, this one is fully 3D, but does still have a fixed camera, though it will move around a bit with you. You start off outside the base and need to do some platforming to get in. This is easily done, and your character is surprisingly nimble and capable for a survival horror game, being able to climb, jump, shoot, and use a knife at the press of a button. Of course, you will need to explore all the environments, collecting items, weapons and ammo that will help you survive. You've got a limited inventory, though it's pretty damn generous, and I never had any issues running out of space, though I am only about 3 hours into the game, so that could change. You'll also come across a load of locked doors which require you to find a way to open it up, mostly keycards and buttons, but these are never easy to come by, and you'll have to solve some simple puzzles in order to get most of the items you need. One of the game's big mechanics is the use of a battery pack. You have it with you at all times, and it has a limited number of uses per charge. The battery can be used to power lifts, open doors, and generally run anything that requires electricity. But you will need to make sure that you know where the nearest charging station is, as if you don't have enough juice, you can't power the thing that you need to power. There are quite a few enemies knocking around, and most of them are quite dangerous. The game actually leans into the survival aspect of the survival horror. Yes, you do have weapons to defend yourself, but ammo really is very limited, and ideally should be saved for large bosses. If you find the slug enemies, you can swat at them with your knife to kill them, but for the most part, you're going to want to just run away when possible. Enemies are tough and deadly. The base itself isn't huge, and you will be going through the same sections repeatedly, but what's cool is that the infection is constantly spreading, so the base does change as you go back to different areas, getting your classic organic goo looking stuff everywhere. Also, you better watch out, as you can also be infected by whatever it is yourself, and if you're not careful, you'll turn into one of the monsters and it's game over. Thankfully, there is a cure, and if you are infected, you can cure yourself, providing you've got enough of them in your inventory. The graphics are decent and very PlayStation 2. I hope you know what I mean by that. It has your standard roster of characters, and the enemy designs are pretty cool. The controls are excellent, but I do wish there was some sort of camera control. But overall, this is a really cool game that I'd actually not heard of before. It's got a boring generic title, but the game is anything but. Definitely one to check out. And finally for today, let's look at a puzzle game with Egg Mania, sometimes known as Egomania. This is a fun little puzzle game that I've actually seen loads of times in various shops etc. for the GameCube and PlayStation 2, but never bothered playing it because back in the day, and even now really, I'd never spend £30 on a puzzle game. It's sort of like Tetris but with a twist, otherwise it would just be Tetris. You play as one of a few egg folk, or yolk. But this is purely cosmetic and it's the puzzling that you have to worry about, so it doesn't matter which one you choose. It plays fairly simple, but does work a bit differently from other games. Here, every stage starts with you and your opponent, who are on opposite sides of the screen, jumping from a balloon in the air. You hit the ground and there's always water below you. Then crates drop from the sky which contain various shaped blocks. You've got to catch the boxes of blocks that you want to use and then press X to add that block to the floor, building yourself platforms. The idea is to build your platforms as high as you can and be the first one to get back to the balloon that you originally jumped from. It sounds easy, as it kind of is, but the water below you is constantly rising, and if it reaches an area where you've left any gaps in a row, that row will sink, lowering you and taking you further from the balloon. This means that you can't just put blocks on top of each other creating a tower straight up, as it'll almost immediately fall down and you'll need to complete full rows, but you will get to a point where you can risk it, and this often pays off. But be careful, as it's possible to trap yourself in areas if you make a wall too high to jump, and you'll be stuck and have to wait for a block to randomly fall to where you are so you can grab it. On the higher difficulties, where things move much faster, I did accidentally do this a few times. As well as the blocks that fall down, you'll sometimes get items to help you or mess up your opponent, like boots that make you move faster and jump higher, or a bomb that you can throw on their screen to smash some of their blocks. These are fun to use, and you've got to keep an eye out for your enemy using them on you. You also have to look out for things like birds, fish and insects that will appear on your side to try and steal your blocks or knock you into the water below. Thankfully, if you do fall in the water, you don't lose, you just lose precious time. There are a few game modes. There's an arcade style one where you can just go one-on-one against all the other characters, and beating them all can unlock even more characters to play as. Not that that makes too much of a difference, but it's still good to have unlockables. There's a puzzle mode where you've got a limited number of blocks, a training mode, a bomb mode, and so on. These are always nice to have, and of course you can play most of them against a friend, and even set up tournaments for when you have a games night. Controlling your egg is easy, with the analog stick being used to move and jump, X places the objects, and triangle throws anything away that you grab by mistake. Pressing L1 drops you down a level, and it doesn't matter if you fall in the water, and you just get taken back to the top of your row, but like I said, you will lose time. The graphics are fine, but not exactly PlayStation 2. Pretty sure this could have been done on a PS1, and maybe in some of the 16-bit consoles without too much in the way of compromise. But puzzle games aren't known for their graphics, and they don't even need good graphics. And the controls are decent, which is what really matters. The fact that you have to grab and place blocks does mean it can be easy to put them in the wrong place though, as you're controlling your egg and not the block. But it is easy to get used to, though I would usually put a few in the wrong place every game. Never the end of the world though. The sound and music are fine, they exist, and they're kind of what you'd expect from a game like this. But yeah, it is actually a really fun game. I wasn't really sure what to expect when I first started playing, and I'm glad that I have actually bothered to do the tutorial, as there's a few things in there that I might not have figured out. But if you do like puzzle games, then this one really is pretty good fun, and it's also super cheap now, so definitely worth picking up. So there you go. 10 games for the PlayStation 2, starting with the letter E, that don't get talked about all that much. Which one is your favourite, and what else could I have included? Of course, you want to let us know in the comments below. Now, all that's left for me to say is thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time.